Welcome to the Millennial Pastor Podcast, where we talk about the intersection between faith and culture. I'm your host, Byron. Josiah's not here today. As we talked about a couple weeks ago for our COVID conversations, we want to have two old guests come back on the show, and only one of us interviewing them, so there's not too many people messing it all up like me. So today, I have
out of state too.
This is true.
That's true. Also, weirdly enough for us, I'm in the same room as the people I'm interviewing, which is never happened for me on this podcast. So this is a little different. So before we get started though, we do have some ads, so we're going to give it a second, let Josiah actually be on the podcast, kind of. Okay, so today on the podcast, again, we have Ryan Alba,
Hello.
who was on the first season for our podcast, and then Trevor Cherryhome.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You didn't use my middle name.
I know. I almost did. I really almost did. So Trevor was on our podcast for the second season, and so they're both good friends of mine. I'm glad they're back on the show. And so like we've been doing with the COVID conversations, the main thing we're asking people is, 2020, am I right? So obviously it was a weird year.
Yeah.
Pandemic. So I guess let's start with Ryan.
There was a pandemic.
Yeah. Something happened this year. It's kind of a big deal worldwide.
So much has happened.
I don't know. So before we really get into that, I guess, Ryan, I do want to ask you, so the first time you were on the show, we talked about how millennial you are.
Yeah.
Do you remember what we came down on that game? I honestly don't.
No clue. I don't remember at all. I like avocado. I don't put it on everything. I drink coffee sometimes.
If I recall, I think you were kind of in the middle too. Kind of like me. There's some things that are definitely and other things that are not that should be.
I'm an older millennial, so I just put it up to that. Yeah.
Fair enough.
It works.
Trevor, welcome back.
It's good to be back.
It's good to have you here in Ryan's house.
Thanks
Thanks for having me here so you can be here.
That's all right.
Trevor, do you remember how millennial you were? What your street cred is?
Probably because of my wife. Yes, she is a avocado snob, a connoisseur. I apologize if there's a sommelier of avocados. She might be that. Yeah. And I am a coffee snob. So I do remember talking about how I just had received like my Chemex on the last podcast,
yeah.
and like I'm learning that. I
don't even know what that means, by the way.
It's like a chemistry set for
drink
coffee. It's so good. So, well, I mean, not really. I mean, it's good. It's just pour over coffee.
It's sorcery. That's what it is.
But
Super fancy
I love it more, but I haven't gotten to the point where like I weigh things yet. So just because I have a toddler now, and it's
you don't bust up the scale every morning.
no.
And, like, make
Are you
sure
kidding
it's
me?
perfect?
No, I do it. I still make pour over, but it's like I do not have time to weigh the grams that I'm putting into this cup of coffee.
Yeah.
So I'm there.
Not exactly a Walter White situation.
No, not yet. Not yet. Yeah. So I know there are people, like on the last episode, I can't remember his name.
Hunter?
Yeah, he is like that.
From what I understand.
Yeah.
Yeah, he's pretty into it
So
too.
Respect.
So, all right.
Respect, Gabe.
So you brought up that you have a child. Ryan, you have two children. They're all young.
Yeah.
So a pandemic
Yeah.
with small children could possibly affect your personal life and what's going on. So I guess we'll go with Ryan first. Crazy year.
Yeah.
What happened?
It was really hard. So first of all, when like everything happened, like when like stuff started shutting down and everything like that, I was on vacation.
Yeah, you
that's
remember that, yeah.
First time Megan
That's right.
and I had been on vacation, like a real vacation, a really long time, and the world broke.
So it's your fault.
And it wasn't like we were in New York or like Miami or something like that, like where we could like rent a car if we had to. No, we were in Hawaii, and so like if we couldn't get on a plane, we weren't coming back. Yeah, actually, the day after we got back, my mom, who had come and watched after our kids, she had like 4 flights canceled in the same day.
Yeah.
So we
That
got
is
out
crazy.
just in time. But yeah, so like not even like considering that, like just we had some like our schedule is just built around who's watching our kids. Like we would go to the gym and we would drop them off in the child care center. We would go to church and take them to the nursery. We would my wife would go to MOPS and she would drop them off at their child care. You know, everything we did was built around who's watching our kids. And even like in Arizona in the summer where it's super hot out, like we would go to the mall and like they have a little play place and like it's air conditioned inside. And like everything just changed. It was really hard. It was a tough year for us for sure.
Feel that.
So go ahead, Trevor. What about you? So just personal life,
Yeah.
2020.
Well,
everything changed.
I mean, think that I remember that we had a meeting, an AZNYI meeting, and we're all like, "Where's Ryan?" And like, "Oh, he's in Hawaii." "Oh, great, sounds good." And the week after, Ryan's like, "What'd I miss?" You're like, "The world shut down." Like, what? He was so out of the loop. It was hilarious. Yeah,
I had heard that Tom Hanks had gotten it.
This is true. Yeah, that's when everybody started freaking out. Yeah, we flew back from Ohio. Me and our district presidents. We were at LC, the leadership conference, and we flew back the day they closed all the schools down there. And that's when for us it was so real. We had to shut down like our immediate event that was coming up. But yeah, our son, he's almost 2 now, and so basically the entire. He turned 1 in April, and basically from 1 to 2, he's lived this pandemic life of we didn't go out. Like we've just started going to the park within the last week, and by the park I mean like our neighborhood park where most of the neighbors know each other. We're communicating, and we all socially distant around the edges, and the kids they already are snotty and everything already. But yeah, it was interesting. The first couple months of the like shutdown, I tried to do a ton of streaming stuff, but I could not get a lot of work done. It was me being dad all day with 2 dogs, and then rolling, trying to get to the next thing, or trying to cook dinner. My wife works in healthcare, and so like Byron, he'd be home probably with the kids. She'd come home. "Oh, look what I did today." "Wait, give me 10 minutes. I just got back from the hospital." Like, "No, babe, trust me. Like, this is so important. Listen to this podcast." It's been interesting. We survived. We were able to do okay, but it definitely gave me the understanding of how much I missed from before. You don't realize we take for granted before it's gone.
Yeah. My family all got it except for me, so it was nuts. Like, and I don't know how. I mean, by the grace of God, I guess so.
Or
Either that, or I was
you're
just
asymptomatic. Maybe the
Or
latter.
tested positive.
Yeah. I tested negative 4 times, like within the course of like 2 weeks.
Yeah.
So I'm pretty sure I never got it, but yeah. Who knows?
So when Josiah and I first did our first episode about this, we talked about, because his wife's a nurse, so you have that, your wife works in a hospital. How's that different than maybe how Ryan and I lived out this whole pandemic?
Definitely for the first half of it, it was like the stripped down station in the garage, right to the laundry, everything went. And like, it was hard for my wife more than anyone, because she would come in and Carson's like, "Mom," like he only knows 3 words, mom, dad, and no. And it was either, mom, he would, she'd walk away, need to go take a shower, clean up, and, he would throw the fit, and she felt bad about that. And it's just this idea of, at that point, back March to June, we had no idea what this was or what it could do. Yeah. Kid's so young, he's a year old, we're like, if we get him sick and then we have to go to the hospital, we can't even be in the room with him. Yeah. I mean, it was pretty terrifying at first, and we got to the point probably this Christmas where it was just like, we've done really well, we've been really healthy, we're going to continue to socially distant, wear masks, and be smart, but at the same time, like, our kid needs to be socializing. He needs to have it because we don't have kids. We thought for the longest time Carson believed he was a dog, because he had 2 dogs for the first whole year and a half of his life. So he crawled on all 4s for a long time. He barked for a long time, and we were certain that he probably thought he was the 3rd pupper. But Now he says a little bit more words, but still not speaking.
Well, progress.
Progress, exactly.
And then Ryan, maybe I need to ask Megan instead, but your wife stays at home right now with 2 toddlers, or they're still toddlers, right?
Mm-hmm.
I don't know how kids work. I don't have any. I don't know when those things change. Besides preschool, I know because
nobody knows. It's a mystery.
But I mean, going from being a stay-at-home mom with 2 kids who are kind of rambunctious and got a lot going on, to now you're really a stay-at-home mom because you're stuck.
Yeah. Well, it was I mean, I think she had no problem telling you that she had a really tough year. In addition to finding out, in addition to being stuck at home, she, when she got COVID, like I'll back up, but like a couple months after COVID started in March, found out that my father-in-law had cancer, and then when she had COVID, we found out that it had spread to his liver, which was horrible news. And so much so to the point where now my wife and kids are living in Missouri to be closer to my father-in-law, because honestly we just don't know how much longer he's going to have. And I mean, we're praying for a miracle, obviously, but we just want to make sure that Megan has as much time with her dad as possible, and the kids hopefully can have some good memories of them spending time together. So basically she's living with her sister and her sister's 2 kids, and they're basically co-parenting. They're trying to quarantine because her dad's still doing chemo, so they're trying to really be very careful. I think her mom and dad are supposed to get vaccines pretty soon. I don't know for sure, but basically she told me the other day, because I was talking about maybe come out and visit them in the next couple weeks or a month or 2, and she was saying basically until they get vaccinated, I probably shouldn't even come out because I'd have to wear a mask nonstop. And
you couldn't even be with your own kids and your wife. Which, unfortunately, there's been a lot of people I've known who have been sick with certain long-term illnesses, or unfortunately cancers come up with multiple people and things were more sudden, but people having to be cautious because of that anyway. And then now you have a pandemic. Yeah. And that can just really, and it makes it hard to see family and be with those people that you love. And if you go to the hospital, no one can go in with you. You have to go into the ER by yourself, and it's just...
Well, that was wild this year. We had so many people at church go to the hospital, and I couldn't make one hospital visit. Yeah. It wasn't until November this last year that we were able actually to start seeing, clergy was able to start going to the hospital again. I mean, we did many phone calls, but it's just not the same of being able to hold someone's hand and pray with them.
Well, I mean, even then, it was December when it started. The cases started going up again.
Yeah,
so it was
huge spikes here.
And for the first couple of weeks in January, Arizona was the hot spot in the world.
Yeah, the worst place to be for COVID in the world.
Yeah. Oh, it was awful.
Well, so that actually is a good transition, though. So you're both so when you were on our podcast the first time, Ryan, where were you at? What were you doing?
Well, I was and still am. I'm an associate youth pastor at Mesa First Region Nazarene here in Mesa. We'll talk about what's going on with that. But that's where I was. That's where I am right now. But things are changing. We'll say.
So during a pandemic, I'll jump to Trevor actually first. Yeah. Where were you when you were first on the podcast?
So I was at Tempe, and to clarify for anyone listening, I was the youth pastor. Since in the episode it was that back and forth, am I youth pastor, am I associate pastor? I'm not sure. To clarify, I was the youth pastor.
And apparently
I'll leave it at that.
That was our fault. Josiah, I didn't do any apologies this episode, but we have one from last year. We need to apologize.
It was 2019. Yeah.
I need to apologize for a dumb joke that we made that confused some people and was confusing for Trevor's life.
It's all right.
I didn't know about it until last week, but so we're sorry that we did that. It's okay. Our bad.
It's okay. Yeah. I was a youth pastor there, and I used the past tense because I am no longer employed there. But yeah,
and we'll jump into that a little bit more.
Yeah, but that was literally December 31st was my last day, 2020. So I was there through the pandemic. It was wild. This last year was wild.
So as youth pastors, how do you be a youth pastor during a pandemic? What's that look like?
You played Among Us. Have you ever played?
Yeah, exactly. I've talked to a lot of people like, well, I play a lot of video games online because it's the best way for me to connect with my kids. Among Us blew up, so I know several youth pastors who said, I play Among Us a lot with our kids.
Yeah.
So what does that look like, Ryan? How did that change? So, I mean, obviously, major events got canceled.
Yeah.
You're not doing camps. You're not doing, like, all kinds of stuff got canceled. So how do you do ministry with teenagers during a pandemic?
It's been rough. I made no youth calendar this year, which was weird. Like,
it's kind of nice.
Yeah. I mean,
I didn't even think about that because I've been in it so long. But what can you do? What can you plan ahead for?
Literally made no youth calendar. We were online. We did the Zoom and the online version for a while. The kids just really stopped showing up though. In fact, I actually did one a couple of weeks ago because here in Mesa they were online only at the school, and I was just thinking, we'll do online only too, just until, hopefully we're not helping spread germs or anything like that. And so I had two students show up, and like at least one of them had two brothers who were also in the youth group. And literally, we're walked in the background. I'm like, "Hey, I see you."
Yeah.
Like, can't even hide.
And they basically just told me "I'm on Zoom all day.
Yeah.
I don't want to do this."
Yep.
Yeah.
I did buy the two kids that showed up. I bought them Amazon gift cards because
There you go.
I figured they should get something for being the two.
Whatever you can get. I feel that.
We tried to do things where we would watch where we would play a stream of Netflix movie and we would chat. I would try to do different games, but it was just really tough. And then when we finally did start showing up, doing in person again, getting them to keep their masks on is next to impossible. Because once again, even when they did go back to school, they're wearing masks all day, and it's just been really tough. And then we've had a couple of kids who just haven't showed up.
Yeah.
And you call their house and don't get any call back, or it's just been really hard. So I don't know what else to say.
I feel that. Yeah, I'm on district leadership here in Arizona, and basically we came back from that leadership conference with the mindset of we're canceling things. Hopefully we can get camp going, but if not, we'll figure it out. And then the mindset was this is gonna last 8 weeks.
Yeah.
We're gonna get through it 8 weeks, and then we'll be back to normal. And so for the first 8 to 10 weeks, I was hyped because I'm I'm going to crush this online thing.
Dude, you did crush it for a while.
I tried.
I want to brag on Trevor.
It's three solid months, so 12 weeks or something like
that. He did a thing for the whole district where he would do it online. He would kind of host. He had different people speak, and they did online worship. It was really good.
Yeah, that was a lot of fun. I got burnt out for sure.
Yeah.
Because it was too much. I should have had 2 other people helping me. So I got a speaker every week, and I had them film it, and then I edited the material. I got a different worship band, which actually I tried to get a different worship band. I ended up with 2, and basically just bounced off of Monte Vista and my own Tempe worship band to lead, and filmed a bunch of worship songs. And so we did. I hosted this live video. It was 2 hours long every single Wednesday night. We called it AZNYI Live. And I did. I'll brag on myself. I killed it for the first 3 months, and then it was
a lot of work for 3 months straight.
Yeah, when we had that mindset of this is going to be 8 weeks long, the 9th week came, then the 10th week, and then my wife is telling me this is going to get worse. From her meeting, she's having daily meetings, and she's texting me these horrible things of oh, there's going to be this surge, and there's going to be so much death, and I'm oh my But I'm supposed to go to camp in June. You can't take camp from me. I've gone to camp every year since 2004. You can't steal. And so I was upset. I was mad. I got tired. And it was I was running out of youth pastors. So I was I don't want to preach every week on top of hosting and getting everything together. Yeah. And it's not that I didn't want my friends like Ryan and Sean to preach with me every time. We were all busy. Yeah. But this idea of, it hit that mid-June, early July point, and I was basically okay. I'm just gonna worry about my kids because I realized though the district thing went well, we had 100 kids for the first couple weeks, and it slowly declined to about 20 by the end. Yeah. my own kids weren't even showing up to the event. I had kids from Sierra Vista, Mesa, Monte Vista, like kids from other groups, but then my own students weren't at the event I was hosting.
Yeah.
And so I realized, okay, what do I need to do to reach to my students directly? And like Ryan, they hated Zoom. They did not ever want to get on because they were already doing digital class all day. They wanted to be together, but my senior pastor, I think wisely, did not allow that to happen for a while. There was just nothing we could do. Eventually, what we ended up learning was my wife and I would take out small groups of our kids. And so we would take out sibling groups together, and we'd take out really close friends that were already hanging out outside of, things, or in the same schools together, so that they were already in close contact multiple times during the week. So going out with, me and my wife going out with two of the high school girls wasn't as big a deal. We stayed masked up. We bought them coffee or ice cream or something like that. And I think that's where we found the most success, was in the very small groups. But by the end of 2020, we only were able to meet once a month. And there's no momentum that you could build. It was literally, let's hype it up as much as we can, and then all we're doing is playing games. There's no discipleship that can happen in this 1 hour a month that we get together.
Yeah.
It was brutal. It was so brutal. And it still is. Like,
Yeah.
It's bad maybe, but I'm glad that's not my job right now, because it'd be an undertaking to continue what the last year was.
Well, I mean, I've been on this podcast before, and I've kind of aired some grievances I've had with ministry in general, but like, I just remember how exhausting youth ministry can be anyway.
Yeah.
And then like literally thinking about like, what would I have done if I was a youth pastor during a pandemic? I don't like a lot of the things you guys just said were some like great ideas. Like, hey, that's a great way to try to get engagement, but eventually it's gonna fall off because the kids are sitting at their computers all day doing Zoom.
Yeah.
Being told what to do and struggling. And I mean, I work at an elementary school, so it's not the same as age as your kids, but our kids, like the older kids in particular, really struggled with being on the line anyway, not having their peers around, not having someone who cares about them to teach them, like, in their personal life, because it's just on a screen, it's not the same.
Yeah.
And so I can't imagine, I mean, I know that churches are struggling anyway with, like, posting worship and sermons and all that, but that's just for adults mostly too. It's like that's not like children's ministry or youth ministry where it's just.
Well, I've even had adults who basically like, let me know when I can come back, and like they've had no interaction beyond.
Mm-hmm.
Well, and I talked about this in the episode Josiah and I were the two on our first COVID conversation, but I mentioned that I stopped going to church in person, kind of go in August because I work at an elementary school and I didn't want to put people at risk. Mm-hmm. I also didn't want to get it from church because the church I was going to, a lot of people weren't wearing masks anyway.
Yeah.
And I didn't want to bring it to school because that'd be a problem.
Yeah.
But yeah, I just since then though, I mean, I'm not checking out sermons every week from my pastor, and I did watch other people preach, which was kind of cool. I had the opportunity to see friends that I don't live anywhere near them.
Yeah.
So I watched some of their sermons and like stuff, but like. And Josiah tried to call me out and say, "Oh, how many more did you watch?" I think it was like 2, maybe 3. But I actually had watched a couple. And my brother, I can watch my brother Will now every week if I wanted to. I don't. Sorry, Will. But I could. I have seen several, but I don't. And I was the same way. Like, I got a lot going on. Work is just harder this year. Everything's just harder because there's just so much going on. Trying to be smart, trying to be safe. And then that just compounds and that becomes a bigger issue. So that's just kind of crazy. So then I guess the next thing, so we've talked about this with other people on the podcast recently, but what's the church look like going forward then? Mm-hmm. Obviously this has been a struggle with the pandemic. Mm-hmm. What's next? And the reason I asked you guys that is because you guys have something very particular you're doing, and it's exciting. But so I guess... Ryan, you want to start? What's going on?
Well, I think going forward, like, first of all, like, I think...
5 minutes.
Okay. I think this wasn't as much of a disruption. It was a disruption in that I think it forced the church, Big C Church, basically 10 years into the future.
Yeah.
I think we, as a church, would have been much more... digital, much more
Honestly, it's not forcing us 10 years in the future.
Yeah.
It forced us to catch up.
Oh yeah.
I was like, we were just behind.
Where the church was going, anyways. So like this idea of like Sunday morning is no longer the goal.
Yeah.
And I would even argue that I don't think Sunday morning ever should have been the goal, but for so much of the structure of the church is designed to set up a good program on Sunday morning. And don't get me wrong, like I think, like I love going and hearing great worship music and hearing a good sermon and being a part of a community. Like I appreciate that. But this idea that everything we do in America, in the world these days, is on demand. I have access to every movie that's ever been made on my television right behind Byron. like you need to it's not like you have to create a sense of belonging other than this is a place that I go for an hour or two on Sunday morning.
Right.
And so I think that's the future. I think the future is the Sunday is something that we do in addition to connecting online throughout the week. Being a part of small groups, having service like outreach opportunities during the week and stuff like that. This whole idea of like, hey, like church is something I do for an hour or two on Sunday is just gone.
Yeah.
And I think that's a good thing. I'm not mourning that at all.
Yeah, I agree.
I think that's and Trevor, I'm gonna let Trevor kind of talk about like what our plans are.
Yeah.
Here in just a minute, but this is where the church is going anyways, and especially in America where we're more and more living in a post-Christian world, and being okay with that and just adapting and saying like the church needs to rethink of what we look like.
Yeah. Well, I asked our team the other day on Facebook, why church? Why did you show up? What were the reasons? Is it the worship and the sermon? Is it what were the reasons? And the responses were what I expected, but also it kind of shows you this grander scheme of the world. So I kind of posed it with this month I've taken off as like a sabbatical, and my wife and I went to brunch at First Watch, which is a great place to grab some eggs and whatnot. We waited outside for 45 minutes to get sat, and then we ate for an hour.
On a Sunday.
Yeah, it's on a Sunday morning at 9:30, 10 o'clock.
Wow.
From my perspective, and I was very, my whole idea in that was looking at the surrounding people. In that 45 minutes before and the hour that we sat to eat, more people came to First Watch, which was a small, maybe 2,000 square foot restaurant. Quite small. More people came to that than went to most churches in America on Sunday morning in that hour and 45 minutes. And so we have to begin to look at this whole different mindscape of, Sunday mornings was the big deal and all these Christians went there, but then there's this entire mission field outside of the building that we've declared as the church. And when I was asking that question to pose, like, why did we? And it was community. It was always community driven. I wanted to hang out with like-minded individuals, people who loved me and cared about me. Music was some of it. Yes, sermon was some of it, but those were never the priority. But I think if we look back post-2020 or pre-2020, we can see the North American focus of church was sermon and worship driven. Yeah. This Sunday morning spectacle. And
spectacle's a great word for it. Yeah. This was the big show. Yeah. It's funny because I hear like things like children's church and youth groups. That's like the minor. There's some denominations that I've worked in that they even said like, oh, one day you'll be a good pastor.
Yeah, you'll be a real pastor.
What I was doing was not being a pastor because I just work with youth.
Yeah.
It's just funny how it's the big show. It's the real thing, the thing that matters.
What's funny to what Ryan said, pulling us into the future, really bringing us to the present. Yeah. Was both Ryan and I became streaming masters during this time. We built streaming rigs for our entire church from the ground up because neither of our churches were running we were running a cell phone, like iPhone camera from the top of the balcony, couldn't see what was happening on stage. But we both, built up this whole thing to continue to prop up the spectacle of church that we understood it as, because it was the only way we understood church. It was the only way that we could do it. And I remember having conversations with not just my leadership, but pastors across the district of, like, this is what I went to school for, to preach. Like, this is what I do. And yes, you do pastoral things during the week, and yes, there's care and all of that, but like, we invest most of our time into writing the sermon and then preparing it and preaching it. And once Sundays were stripped from us, it was like our identity was.
Yeah.
Like, oh, I guess being a Christian is more than just showing up on Sunday morning for my seat that I carved my name into. And that's true. It was maybe one of our friends' kids. I'm not gonna name any names.
Yeah, so I mean, all that to say, the reason why Trevor left his position at the end of December, the reason why I'm preparing to leave my position, I kind of alluded to that earlier, is that we're planning a church.
Yeah.
We're planning a church this year, 2021. We've been planning it for
What's weird is
like almost a year and a half.
yeah, we're today, the day we're recording, I'm not sure when this goes out, so it's the 5th.
Yeah.
Our original plan was to launch it in 2 days.
Yeah. Yeah.
That's kind of weird. I keep saying that over and over again. Like, once the 7th comes, it'll like, I'll stop. But
Yeah, Super Bowl Sunday, man.
we did a lot of prep and all of this to plant a church through a pandemic.
Mm-hmm.
And of course, we've had to change and modify. But yeah, Ryan and I, we are planting what is now known. We're official Nazarene, like, doing business as.
Yeah.
The Table, a house church network, or per the legal standing, we're the Table Nazarene. I guess that's what we had to put on there.
Yeah.
We like the Nazarene Church. That's not a dig.
Yeah, but this model that we're doing. We're planning a house church network, and this idea of we see the importance of the body, obviously, of coming together, being the church, but I mean, we could tell you we can talk for hours about this, but to kind of sum it up, when Trevor and I started dreaming about what would happen if we planted a church, we just kept coming back to community, discipleship, accountability, this idea that smaller can be better.
Yeah.
And
Smaller
also,
can be bigger.
Yeah. And then also this idea that buildings are great. We have nothing against buildings. I live in a building. I know lots of buildings. But this idea that a lot of churches just get weighed down by buildings.
Yeah.
They become what's the word I'm looking for?
Balls and chains.
Yeah. They're not assets anymore.
Yeah.
You know, they become things that you just sink money into constantly, and then they just sit there 6 days a week.
Yeah. Well, even
most
just
of the time.
you think about it, like 30 years ago, which is only the 90s. Like,
Wow.
that's a pill. It's a pill to swallow. 30 years ago, that's when church was still happening in the building every day. You know, Sundays you had church. Sunday nights you had Sunday night church. Mondays was MOPS. Tuesdays was, college. Wednesdays with youth and children's. Thursdays was, the men's whatever. It was like, felt like, at least in the churches I grew up in, the churches I went to, it was.
Busy.
And I feel like it was the year after I graduated, or maybe 2012. So I graduated in 2010. I'm a youngin', I know. But about 2011, 2012 is really when I started to see the switch. And I know that was happening before then, obviously. But it was an intentional part of my life that I didn't go to practices on Wednesdays for sports. I went to church, and we did things that were very intentional, but
Oh wow, you were more Christian than us. We skipped Wednesday night church during football season.
my grandfather was a district superintendent.
Oh,
so
I know, that's true.
I have a lot to maintain here.
I forgot.
Byron.
You're Nazarene
I'm Nazarene royalty over
That's
here.
right, I forgot. I don't know how. I forgot to pay my
Yeah,
allegiance.
you're good.
I'm a bad Nazarene.
No, but it was after that, and then maybe it was a culture shift with my parents, but it wasn't as much as a priority for my younger siblings and for their friends, and it became this like fight between, okay, well, yeah, we have youth group, and like it's fine, like youth group's fun. We don't do finger rockets anymore because of like the lawyer or whatever, but but it, you had dance, band. I was in show choir, and even that we were doing. Like in the wintertime, I remember my choir doing like 24 shows in December. Like sometimes two to three shows a day, where we go like these retirement centers during the day, and we'd have an evening concert for like the city council or something. I don't know. It was wild, and there's just this competition of, well, like we'll go to church on Sundays. Like it became the spectacle of this is when it happened.
Yeah. Yeah, and that's the thing is that so that was when everything was in the building.
Yeah.
And now everything, like, people are busy nonstop. And not to say that, that's okay. I think honestly we need to learn how to say no more as a culture. And learn how to slow down and not look at our phones all the time. But this idea of
portable laptops and phones.
this idea that, well, you can either fight that and just say back in my day,
Yeah.
or you can say you can talk about the good old days, but guess what? Unless you invent a time machine, the good old days aren't coming back.
Yeah.
So instead of saying like, why can't things be the way they used to be? What we really wanted to say is like, well, we need to think of new ways to be the church today.
Yeah.
That's kind of a lot of the vision that we have around the table.
Yeah.
One of our values for the table is that we want to experiment. We want to try new things.
Be the innovators.
The church sucks at R&D. There's not very much incentive to try new things in traditional churches, and it's like we want to be in places where we can feel that freedom to be like, we're gonna make mistakes and we're gonna try things that fail, and just being okay, well, that didn't work. Let's go on to the next thing, and maybe we'll get one that does work.
So it's something that I find interesting in ministry. When I was a pastor, I would talk to people who were like, I want to do this new thing. Like, I have this passion. Go, awesome, let's do that.
Yeah.
We're gonna help. I'm gonna be right next to you. We're gonna do this thing. And when I was in Hawaii, at a church in Hawaii, I had a lady come to me and say, "There's a lot of homeless people who live downtown in Hilo. I want to find a way to help them."
Yeah.
So okay, well, let's figure out what they need first. So she and I and a couple other people from the church went down. We just started talking to people who are homeless and said, "What can we do? Like, what do you need?"
Yeah.
And they said, Hawaii is very wet. Especially in Hilo, it rains a lot. It's one of the rainiest cities in our country. So they needed dry clothes. They needed things to store clothes in, so if they get soaking wet, they can change. Things like that. So we gathered some clothes. We got some stuff for free, and we did all this stuff. And we went downtown, and we gave it all away. And I was talking to people even then. I was like, okay, this is what we have. We had some foods and stuff too. Like, we gave them a meal, and I said, what else do we need? And they're like, we need socks.
Yeah.
We didn't have any socks. And they said, everybody who came was like, do you have any socks? We need socks. So I went to the store and bought as many socks as I could. I went to the Walmart there, and I just cleaned out like a huge section of socks. And we gave every single pair away. And then we came back as a group, everybody who participated, and we said, okay, what went well, what didn't go well, and what did we miss? What was the thing that we missed they needed the most? And in that situation, it was socks.
Yeah.
Homeless people need socks, by the way. If you want to do a homeless ministry, bring socks. Lots of socks.
Amen.
Anywhere you are, they need socks. But we did a debrief, and we sat down in our church, and I said, what are we good at? What did we do terribly? And how do we close that gap?
Yeah.
And it wasn't, that didn't go well. The first time, it did not go well.
Yeah.
I said, we did terrible. Okay, how do we get better? It's not it didn't work, so we're just going to quit because we don't know what we're doing. Yeah. I reached out to other people I reached out to shelters, not in Hawaii. There wasn't one really in our area. Yeah. But I reached out to shelters in LA. I know they have long-term, people have been in shelters forever in LA. I've been to one of them on a mission trip in high school.
Yeah.
I called them. I just cold called them. I said, I need to talk to somebody. I want to know what I need to do. Yeah. So we can change and innovate and be totally different.
Yeah.
So with that being said, we talked about buildings and all that. You guys are talking about a home church network. Mm-hmm. So let's start with that. What's a home church? What's that look like? What's that mean?
Yeah, when you're looking at, church, obviously our thought process, like we were just talking about, is this building, this place that you go to for church. Mm-hmm. Well, we believe that church can happen within this place, this living room that we're sitting right now, right? Like, we look at scripture and it says when two or more are gathered. Why can't that just be church? And so taking the model of church how we know it and bringing it into the house. And maybe that looks very similar to where our model is fluid, where it can be prayer into guitar-led worship with the sermon. And it could be totally different, where this model could have a very liturgical style, where it's a read and response for worship. Or maybe it's a moment where you sit in active silence and listen for what God wants you to do. Each house can be individual. And what's amazing is, church in the house, that's the first step, house church. But then you take it to this next step. When you look at house churches, there's house churches everywhere, but it's one, and they do their thing and they do it well. Well, we have this idea, this thing that won't stop in our brains of connecting those. And so initially our thought process for our launch is 3 to 5 separate houses meeting simultaneously that are all a part of the one banner of the table. This place of common ground where you can come regardless of who you are, where you've been, or where you're going, and know that there is food at the table for you, that there is comfort at the table for you, that there is love at the table for you, where you are, whoever you are. But then to expand that to the greater role, because we also understand the need for the greater community, right? And so having these small networks of church houses, we don't want it to become this clique. We don't want it to become this, hey, here's me and my 12 best friends, and we do church, but we don't want anyone else. No. The whole goal here is multiplication and expanding the kingdom. And so, we've kind of built this network, and the first 3 Sundays of our month will be focused in the house. We do church in the houses around the valley. In, the Valley of Phoenix, it's massive. And so the hope is we can have a house every 5 miles. That'd be amazing. That's long term. Yeah. But then our 4th Sundays is intentionally bringing it back to the greater community. Because as you read through Scripture, you see these moments in Acts where it was the believers in a home breaking bread. Mm-hmm. But then also Paul brought 3,000 people to Christ at one moment, right? Yeah. And so there is those mountaintop, those huge, wild times that you get to have together. And so being able to do both, bringing really tight discipleship within the houses, and then further expanding it to show you are not alone in this. Here is your brothers and sisters of Christianity, not just the table, but people who love you for who you are and believe in this guy, Jesus Christ, who came and died for you. And our model expands even further than that, because every so often you have the 5th Sunday, and we decided so often churches just do church and they just do it again. Well, what if on those 5th Sundays, that happen 4 or 5 times a year, we took our house church network and every person in it and said, go and serve your community. Yeah. Let's not pack up and go to India and build a church and pat ourselves on the back and go away. That's great. That's still going to happen regardless of what we decide to do, right? Yeah. So instead of replicating that, what can you do for your neighbor? When Jesus says to love your neighbor, right? It's not talking about this like metaphorical neighbor, but literally the person you live right next door to. What do they need? Maybe it's socks, right? Mm-hmm. And maybe it is the homeless people within your community. How can you love them, your neighbors, right? And so, kind of breaking down the model that we understand today and taking some of the best parts of it and then kind of reshaping some of the ways that we understand church.
So showing that we talked about this already, church became a spectacle. It's this thing on Sunday we do, and you're trying to do something you're inverting it a little bit. You're saying, hey, church is not this one thing. Church is many things. Yeah. It is fellowshipping. It's called the table. Is there a particular reason why you chose the table?
Yeah, a couple of reasons.
There's a couple reasons. First of all, it's this idea of everybody's welcome. Yeah. You see that a lot in Scripture. This idea that nobody is too good. Like, the table is a place that is an equalizing place in society. Yep. Rich or poor, we all got to eat. So this idea that, hey, everybody's welcome. You can come here. Doesn't matter if you've never gone to church before in your life, or if you've grown up in the church, or if you've been burned or turned away from the church. Everybody's welcome. And so that's kind of the mindset, is that we begin with fellowship, and maybe we're sitting around eating tacos. We did Brenner a couple of weeks ago. Yeah, that's great. So breakfast for dinner.
Breakfast for dinner. So good.
And maybe you're doing that, but this idea that just being the people of God together is an act of worship, and then also the act of communion, the act of taking the Eucharist at the end. We say that we bookend our services by the table, in that we begin with fellowship around a meal and we end by the Lord's Supper. Yeah. And so it's this idea that the table is the thing that unites us through all of it.
Mm-hmm.
That's awesome. I really like what you guys are doing. I'm excited about it. I do have another question, though. You guys posed this question and then answered it on Facebook not last week or a couple weeks ago. Isn't this a small group? Small groups get together and eat. They do worship together. So is this a small group? What do you got?
So my favorite question I've received so far, I was presenting this to my church board initially, and one of my board members asked, "Is this just small groups on steroids?" And I'm like, yeah, but no. And we ended up discussing this within our core team. And Joel brought up a great point. He's a member of our core team. He's our graphic designer. He's a worship leader, great guy. But Joel had brought up, he's like, well, what about this? We're not a small group. We're a church, obviously. And so what did he say exactly?
We're instead of
being a church that has small groups.
We're a collection of small groups that
are a church.
That's not,
and
like
this idea of, yeah, you're right, it is small group. Because what is small group, right? Like, what is the definition of that? Some people have this idea of Sunday school is a small group, right? Or this coffee shop. You just go and get coffee and you talk, and it's your accountability group. Small group. Well, we're doing church, and so, like Ryan said, we bookend our service with the table. We open with dinner every time. It's this inviting moment to where if you're talking to your coworker about coming to church, they're like, yeah, 10 a.m. is a little bit early for me. I'm probably going to be hungover from the night before, so no thanks. Mm-hmm. And so instead of trying to figure that dilemma out, it's like, hey, you want to come over to my house for dinner? Yeah. Like, what's the catch, right? Yeah. Okay, the catch is we're also going to talk about this Jesus guy. But like that is so much more inviting, right? This open door, open hearts, this idea of we're having dinner. We're just come over. It's free for you. I just want to know you better. And then from that, we go into prayer and worship. And again, worship is a spectrum. It can be very guitar, choir-led driven, or it can be liturgical, or it can be silent and, listening for God. And then we go to a sermon where the sermon is intentionally kept short. One point. If you have a lot of points, all points must make the same point. 1 point sermon, please. But to keep it short, less than 20 minutes, because we want to discuss what was just spoken. When we open the scripture and we read through 15 verses, that's great. And you can try to tell me all those things. But when I have to go home alone to try to figure that out as a brand new Christian, or maybe someone who doesn't even profess to be one, it's probably not the best place, right? Yeah. But so in the moment, we can break it down and ask the questions, well, why did this say this in Kings? And I think when we think of Kings, we can think of some of the wild verses, like the bear story. Or
story.
Yeah, these ones that they're in the Bible, right? Why? But then from that discussion, then we go to communion, bookending it by the table. And when you do that, it begins to shift the understanding of church. It's so much easier to get into it as both a Christian and non-Christian. And if someone just shows up for dinner and hangs out with us for 10, 15 minutes into the worship and goes, I'm out for now, that's a seed planted, right? That was a connection. Hopefully in that hour before, you got to know their name. Yeah. You learned a little bit about who they are. Yeah. You heard the good or the bad. Like, wherein as church, when do we get to do that? That 3.5 minute.
Shake someone's hand.
And we do that. It's COVID. Yeah, you're not allowed.
You can do that. That's something that I was thinking about too while you were talking. Whenever I go someplace new, I like to go to several churches. And I'm very outgoing. I can talk. My brother Wilk says that there are no strangers in this world to me, which is true. But when I go visit a church for the first time in a new area, I intentionally don't talk to people unless they approach me. Mm. Because I'm so good. I would just talk to anybody. But I want to see, I guess I'll say judge. That's kind of a harsh word to say. But I judge churches by how they approach new people. Yeah. People that they don't know, there's no one I have a connection to. Does anybody come talk to me? Yeah. Well, that's not going to happen at a house church because they wouldn't know about it. You don't have a sign out front saying, service times at this, Reverend so-and-so.
We might have a small sign. Yeah. We might have a yard sign.
Well, that's fine. Yeah, but I mean,
but you're right. There's not going to be the banner scrolling sign,
this is a Nazarene church. I used to go to Nazarene church when I was a kid, and wherever state I'm from. So I'll try that church. It's more intentional. Yeah. And then when people are there, hopefully they're not sitting in the corner by themselves, not being spoken to because that would be really awkward for everyone
awful.
involved.
They would never
But,
come back.
No, of course not.
Yeah.
But so that's one thing that would be different about a house church. The other thing I was thinking of is the last time you were on the podcast, Trevor, we talked about hockey. So you talked about the guys that you play hockey with that didn't even know you were a pastor for a long time. And do you think those guys would be more willing to show up to the church you work at, whatever church that might be, when it's a typical Sunday morning thing? Or would they show up at your house for a meal, knowing? I mean, don't bait and switch them, but don't Jesus juke them, but tell them, hey, this is what this is.
Yeah.
But where are they going to be more likely?
Oh, for sure. Well, I've already had those conversations, which is funny because that original podcast is what kind of shifted my mindset about what I needed to do in discipling and just being who I am, and not proselytizing people, but at the same time being forthright with them. And we won the championship back last summer. We were able to do a condensed COVID season, and
It was really big. It was on TV.
it was on TV. We were the worst hockey players in Gilbert. So
Nice.
the lowest division, we won it. So it means we're the best of the worst. But after, we're all hanging out, and they gave us a bar tab, so like the drinks are flowing between the team, and I'm sitting there, I'm like, I'm just gonna start talking about it. Guys, I'm planting a church. Like, I'm planning to probably leave my job soon, and would you want to come to my house? And almost every single person I talked to that night was like, yeah, I'd come hang out with you at your house. And like, yeah, I'm not that religious, but you're like, I know you, you're cool. I know you're not going to judge me for, and I mean, they're half faded at that point. So probably, most of them probably don't remember the conversations. But yeah, it was.
Seed planted that they don't remember.
Yeah, but it was this, absolutely. It was already this moment of, I've already spoken with 3 different guys on the team, and they're like, yeah, I want to be a part of it. One of them asked to help do our video. And I gave him my hard drive. He has the files. He hasn't done them yet. I'm looking at you right now on the camera. But he's busy, so I get it. I get it. But yeah, it's a totally different environment, especially because it's my house. They played with me for the last 5 years on this team. They know my wife. They know I've got 2 rowdy dogs, and they love my kid already. Like, one of our older guys on the team, every time we go do a team function, like, he just takes the kid. He's like, oh, I got him. Don't worry about this. Like, we're going to hang out together. And I'm like, it's so great that, one, I can trust him to do that, but, like, he wants to. And he's a great dad. He's got some older kids already. And, I mean, just this idea of church is already kind of happening there, even though I'm not preaching a sermon, or we're doing guitar-led worship, or we're, even opening the Bible. But I've had some pretty deep theological discussions with some of those guys already. And, yeah, there's none of them. Well, one of them came to my previous church, and he came for a few weeks and realized, nah, not for me, not this place. But he's like down to come to my house here in a couple weeks and start doing house church. And maybe they're only a once a monther, maybe they're a once a quarter person that comes and hang out, but they know that that's always the safe place they can come to. And I hope that we can disciple well enough to where this is something that they want to do, and it changes their life, and they realize it, and they catch what we're trying to toss,
Yeah.
But yeah, I'm thinking about even my neighbor. Like, we're within this plant and this model. It's like, cool, you want to be a host house. Who are the 9 people that you live around? Like, think about it, and like, maybe if you're listening right now, who are your 9 neighbors? And like, above you, if you live in an apartment complex, above you, below you, around you, if you live in like a smaller neighborhood, like those who surround you. I know I don't have neighbors behind me, so I have to think kind of further out. I know 3. Yeah. I'm a pastor planting a church in my neighborhood, and I know 3. Shame on me, right? It's this, how can I be the light of the world in my neighborhood? Mm-hmm. What do I need to do? And I'm starting to realize this, and so we're looking at the neighbor on our left side, and we've connected with her really well, and I've helped to mow her yard. We shoveled 3 tons of rock earlier this year with her. She got my son gifts for Christmas, and then I think to my neighbor on my right, I don't know them. We're literally like left to right, and I know one really well. We exchanged Christmas gifts, and the other, I did the head nod.
Yeah.
And so how do we as Christians, instead of, again, going to the spectacle, the building I commuted 17 miles to my church. I didn't know anyone who lived next to the building that I worked at for so many years now. How can I now be the church? And I think that's something within our model is that when we talk about we're small groups that are a church, it's because literally we, the people, are the church.
Yeah.
Because there isn't the building to call the church any longer. I don't want my house to be called the church. It's my house.
Yeah.
It's this place that is safe for you to come. But I am the church. And not for any selfish reasons other than I am just being exactly what God has called me to be.
I think that was one of the major lessons of COVID too, that I just really had to get out of calling the building the church, you know, and so I'm going to the church, and I'm going to, and I really, like, I've really tried to train myself out of saying that.
Well, I remember back when when your kids were still here, and you had told Paisley we're going to church, and you came to my house because we were doing house church that night, and she goes, "This isn't the church. This is Trevor's house." There's this like idea of, like, even in her, you know, 3-year-old mind, her understanding of the church was the building that you went to Sundays, and so this idea of changing it, we're going to church. We went to Trevor's house, and that's where she gets to play with the princess slippers because my wife still has those from when she was a kid. And
she really loves it. and hockey. She loves
hockey. Oh man,
she loves playing hockey at Trevor's house.
When she gets back, Carson's gonna teach her a thing or two.
Yeah.
So I guess one other question I would have about this, well, I have a lot of questions, but we'll let everybody know how they can learn more about your church, the network, and everything that's going on. But what's it like to start planning a church, doing all this work, and then a pandemic happens? Obviously, you said that you've already mentioned that changed things a little bit. You talked about the 7th being the day you were supposed to that was supposed to be the start.
Yeah.
And that's not happening. So
no.
That's crazy. Like, how'd that play out? Like,
we've just really had to learn to just be really flexible.
Yeah.
I mean, we went through, like, for those of you who've never planted a church or been a part of a denomination, like, we had to write out essentially a business plan. We called it a ministry plan. It's about 16, 17 pages of, like, this is what we're going to do. This is like month to month, breaking it out of, like, this is our plan.
What our budget
was. And to be responsible to say, like, hey, there you go. And we're back. Sorry, guys.
That was like straight Animaniacs right there.
we have fake radio DJ.
Yeah, we had a little technical difficulties, but we're back. But yeah, so we just made a major change last night. We were gonna do this big kickoff event. We're gonna have food. We were gonna give away prizes. We were gonna try to invite all the neighbors. We can't do that anymore.
Yeah, COVID.
So actually, you were telling me about permitting for that too, or like getting like during COVID, like no one's gonna let you do that, especially in Arizona right now because we're on fire still. It's getting.
Well, what's funny is, like, she was the lady we've been communicating with was pretty okay with, like, yeah, you can do it, like 32 people, and we're like, yeah, okay, well, maybe we can have a sign up and 32 at a time. And she goes, how are you gonna, like, make sure that happens?
Yeah.
And we're like, well, we can't.
Yeah.
We can't make sure. And, like, the thought was, like, well, we can just do it, right? Like, let's just say, yeah, we'll figure it out. We're only gonna invite 32, and we'll just do it. But, like, what if more people come? And what if they come and check it out? And then we're blacklisted from using Mesa City parks.
Yeah.
Let's not do that. Let's just say, hey, like, we'll figure
it out in the future if we screw up this one.
So let's change this current plan to just match the current environment. Like, we have to adapt.
Yeah.
Which that's been the tail of the tape for this entire plant, has changing our date from which, you know, looking back all the way, you know, almost a year ago, maybe not a year ago, it was probably like May or June, right? May, I think. It was in the, you know, spring, early summer that we decided officially we're moving from February to August for our launch. And I remember, like, my leadership had already made the decision I was leaving in December 31st of that year. And so when, like, I said, hey, we're not launching until August, it was like this, well, we've already made plans. We already have your replacement. So, like, we're still going to go forward with that. And I'm like, well, I have seniors that are graduating that I've been with for 5 years. Can I just stay till May? No, we're already going a different direction. It's like, cool. We're leaving well. I support you. I basically gave all my material to the person who took over for me. Like, I tried my best to make sure that he could be successful in taking that over. Because, like, and I didn't want to be a speed bump. I came on after 18 months of having that time between youth pastors, and kids still compared me to the guy 18 months prior.
Oh, yeah.
And so I'm like, how can I do this to make sure in the middle of a pandemic, this guy is not going to be, well, you're not Trevor.
Yeah.
I hope not. Like, we're totally different people. But in that, we've had so many things that had to change, and we had to learn to be flexible more than anything, because we could stay rigid and we could try to launch, this Sunday. But when you think about it, who wants to show up to a bunch of different houses in the middle of a pandemic on Super Bowl Sunday, right? Or who wants to show up at one big party? Like, we can't do that, right? Like, call the police.
That was our plan. Is we were gonna have a big Super Bowl tailgate party. We were gonna have a service, and it was gonna be awesome.
Yeah, it was. Maybe 2022.
So, yeah,
that'll be an awesome service next year.
Yeah.
But that's just the thing, is that we've just had to learn, and I think I want to give credit to our district leadership. They've been really great at just saying we understand that this is a plan. It's not set in stone.
Yeah.
They've been very encouraging. Hey, just because you have a plan doesn't mean that things don't change. That you don't get new information. So we've really felt that freedom to just kind of adapt and move as we've had fit.
Yeah.
I mean, we're as of right now, we're still planning our event for April, which I don't remember what it is, but we had basically an event a month, leading up until August, starting in March. But I mean, odds are we're probably gonna have to adapt to that.
It's a movie in the park. That's what it is.
Yeah.
Movie in the park. Maybe that one can happen. Spread enough blankets around on the park. 6 feet apart.
32 people?
32 people.
Yeah.
Well,
Yeah.
and so, I mean, I've never planted a church, but I know people who have, and in a normal situation, they always say, we had to be really flexible. And so I think you guys have, that's what you are. You have to be flexible. It's also even worse than normal.
Well, I think our model provides that flexibility in that we don't have the one place, the one building that we've been trying to raise money for, or that, because if we wanted to meet in a school, we can't. City of Mesa will not let any outside organizations utilize their campuses.
Yep.
Unless you were previously using it before, we can't go rent a school building. We tried to connect with AMC to rent a movie theater. No, they ghosted us. If we were trying to plant a traditional church, we would have to probably meet in another Nazarene church or another church that would lend us their building. We'd have to meet in a park, which works for most of the year. But once you hit that May, you're not meeting outside in Arizona.
So that's what's funny. In this part of Arizona, it's the summer you can't meet outside.
Yeah.
Everywhere else it's oh no, winter, there's snow, it's too cold.
Yeah.
Here it's it was 80 degrees today, something like that?
It was beautiful today.
It was
72.
It's February 5th, and it was 80. I think it was 80.
I came down from my Prescott area and I was oh man, it feels great outside. This is awesome.
Yeah, I got a little upset today. I figured Arizona needs to make up its mind. Is it winter or is it not?
Yeah, literally a week and a half ago, 2 weeks ago, we were in Prescott, and there was over 1.5 feet of snow. And we come down, and now the last 3 days has been over 75. I'm not. We are complaining. I'm not complaining. I love it. My kid got to play outside for an hour and a half. Can't beat that. He went to bed so hard. It was head on the pillow, out.
Well, when you guys left, I ended up not going to work for the next 3 days because we got snowed out.
Thick,
We had so much snow.
Yeah, we left right at the right time.
So, I guess I'll make the announcement, even though it's been online now for a while before this gets posted. So this podcast and others like it, mainly millennials who are either pastors or in and around ministry, we're kind of bringing ourselves together to create a podcast network. And we're calling it the Millennial Pastor Podcast Network, which is...
Hashtag, it's a network.
Yeah. It makes us sound a little arrogant because we're hey guys, join us, but we'll use our name and just put network after it. But so it actually was announced on our social media stuff today. Have you guys put it out yet?
Yes.
Put it out today?
Yeah, I came today too.
I think everybody put it
my
out
wife
today.
did today as well. Yeah.
So it's been posted on social media and everything, so people who listen to our podcast will already know, probably. But so we're bringing some other podcasts together. We're hoping to expand more, but right now we have 3. The first one is this one, because it's our name and we think we're special.
The mothership.
There you go. I like it.
The second one is a great way for people to learn more about what you guys are doing and what your endeavors. And so why don't you go tell me about that real quick?
Yeah.
What you got going on?
So our podcast is called The Table, a church plant journey.
I see. You don't even get it either. I mess it up all the time.
So say it again one more time. Nice and clean.
There you go.
Yeah. So obviously it's us two being silly, but the idea is that we've both listened to church podcasts. We both listen to ministry podcasts. I've listened to church planting podcasts, but every single one I've listened to has been after the fact.
Yeah.
It's been, we planted 3 years ago, here's what we did. Or, hey, I've planted 5 churches, here's what works, what doesn't. And so ours is kind of, it's half podcasts, it's half us, and it's also kind of just like a journal of like us kind of going through, here's what's happening. Yeah. We try to be pretty honest in that we're pretty clear with, here's something that we did that worked really well, here's something that we did that didn't, and just kind of be really open with this idea that, hey, planting a church is hard, and it's partly just for us to maybe when our kids are older, we can show it to them and say, hey, this is what happened.
Look, 30 people listen to this.
Yeah. But also it's this idea of I want people to be able to hear the raw, unedited, this is what it's actually like kind of in the trenches deal.
Yeah. Going from that, my wife is one of the other people that's joining our network. She is Dr. Rochelle Cherry Holmes, though she doesn't want to go by doctor. So she's a pediatric physical therapist. She does great things with Phoenix Children's Hospital. But she started The Pastor's Wife, which was just the title of the podcast to start because she is a pastor's wife. She's a pastor's spouse. And the initial thought, season 1, was let's interview pastor spouses, this kind of unsung hero of the ministry force where these men and women come and they do the children's ministry, they play the piano, they take care of all the stuff behind the scenes, and some of them secretly run the church.
Yeah, they're the secretary.
So this idea of giving them a voice, sharing their experiences, some of their, the misconceptions, or maybe the, what would the word be? It's like what you assume of someone. Stereotype. I'm a little tired. Yeah, the stereotypes of that, and just kind of opening the door. And so she did that, and it went really well. I mean, her first season went rock solid. She just started the second season and is kind of expanding on that a little bit more she is still the pastor's wife doing the interviewing, but opening that into just ministry in general. So often we have these amazing people who do so much work and are unpaid for it, right? They are like pastors in their own right. But they work full-time jobs elsewhere, and then they come and they spend hours for Wednesday night for children's, or they're choir directors, or leading mops, or so many different things. So there'll still be pastor spouses on the podcast, but there's also this new avenue of ministry leaders, lay members, and kind of their experience, peeking behind the curtain and just expressing what ministry is for all of us. It's not just, because so often the pastor is the person who talks, right? They're the person on the stage who has the platform, who has the blog, who has the podcast, right? And so just giving more people a voice. And I think she's really passionate about that. She just started a business during the pandemic. She started a nonprofit called Accessible Youth Playgrounds. She's like, I'm just going to do it. We're doing everything else. Why not? I'm like, I love you. Go for it. She just cares deeply about others. And she just, in that podcast, wanted to give other people a voice.
So yeah, I guess I'll give you guys a second if you want. Anything else you want to talk about with what's going on with the house, or anything else you want to get off your chest, or your viewers here.
It's
so you can tell me how terrible I'm being.
I want to talk about my co-pastor for a second.
We've known each other a long time, and there's something that I need to tell you.
It's a long list of grievances.
My big thing. So Ryan and I, we are currently on the hunt for house hosts. So if you live in the Phoenix East Valley area and you're listening to this and the table sounded interesting, hit us up at the Table Naz on any of our social medias. TheTableNaz.church is our website. We are looking for house hosts and for house pastors. Those are two very different kind of roles and within our network, though they can be the same. You can be a host and a pastor. My wife and I are going to be doing that in our own. We're going to be hosting and pastoring in our own house. So if you want to join our team, if you live in the Phoenix area and you want to do this with us, again, like I said, our socials are The Table Naz, our website, thetablenaz.church. If you just want to learn more about this, you live like in Spokane and you're like, I want to do that where I live. Like, the beauty of this is we do want to expand this. Maybe it's all selfish. I want to get on that like Nazarene, that Nazarene, what is it called? Magazine? Yeah. I want to get on that one day. And
Some people have really big dreams.
Real big dreams. I think.
Well, you forget he's Naz royalty. He wants to expand from Arizona to the
world.
Yeah.
Oh shoot, that one went off again. Oh well.
Okay. So anyway, well, thank you guys for being here. Thanks for letting me have the podcast in your house, Ryan.
Yeah.
Appreciate it. I'm glad you guys are both back. It's been a crazy year for everybody, but I'm excited to see what's going to happen with everything that's going on with the house. Well, network and all of it.
Yeah.
I'm excited.
Yeah.
Also, so check us out. I mean, if you want to hear more about what's going on with millennials and pastors' wives and spouses and lay people doing ministry and all this craziness, check us out on all of our social media. We have Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, all those. And then we'll also now have links to all of our other podcasts, so check those out as well. Thank you for listening, and we appreciate the support. I can't talk. I'm tired. And
see you next time.
Yeah, we'll talk to you soon, and please check out our other podcasts and see what's going on.
All right.